actually come up with some practical, come out of this room at 3:15 with some practical ideas for action. So what I'm going to suggest is that anybody who's got a blank sheet of paper in front of them, could you stick your hand up?
The large sort of flip chart size piece.
Because we have got some proposals, and is that one blank? Okay. So you had an idea about the media and involving the issues around climate change. Right? Would you like to write that on that sheet of paper at the top, your proposal? And that's what we want really from each group, is a proposal for action. So can I start with this group here, please? Can we hear your feedback? Have you got a pen?
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
Yes, you maybe if you stand up to speak, and although it's quite a small space to project.
Yeah, we were talking about challenging balance in economics reporting, and we were trying to think of ways to do that. I think part of what we were talking about was to create some sort of a networking group, to literally focus on, challenging current economic sort of stories and things like that. Creating a group that is firstly able to take advantage of the journalism nature by offering our own stories and getting those out there and saying, look, these are alternatives, these are alternatives. Trying to make a group that as well doesn't perhaps espouse one particular economic group, but offers these things out. And I think an important part of that would be to have to have a section of it which explains the basic building blocks of economics, to people who are interested and want to get involved. Because one of the things a lot of the people here said was that economic stories are completely dehumanized all the time. There's no real human impact level. You don't get an idea of what the 3 trillion actually affects and what that means. And so trying to humanize the stories and trying to push forward, humanitarian ideas in that. Part of that, that one group, this network that we want to create, would also involve in sort of doing a lot of direct action things. Ideas came forward like creating a free sheet like the Metro or something like that. That's been done before, and just handing that out, in a single moment. Also making full use of social media, because as she said here, that is a way that a lot of people get their news, and it is important. So if you had one consolidated group with a number of different members, they could firstly push against the current economics reporting, try and offer alternatives, find a place to collate all of those alternatives to then direct people to, and in the same way, make use of social media and stuff like that. What am I missing out here? Is that?
That's your.
That was the.
That's your 3 minutes.
Okay.
Could you stick it on the back wall? I think it'd be a good idea for when you do your feedback to actually go up to the back wall and stick it up there and speak from there would be really helpful. I think then you can, and everybody can hear you. So can we move to this one, please?
Okay, well our topic, I'll tell you while I move to the back, was challenging the bank and providing alternative sources. So there is some overlap between our suggestions and the previous group.
Yeah, there will be.
But our 3 are how did you make that stick up?
Mine was sticky.
It's on the bottom. It's upside down.
Anyway, so our 3 were, number 1, to complain, to look out for examples of narrow reporting, to complain, to draw attention to them and to ask questions, and to ask for ecological economics, even from organisations like the BBC. So just to be really difficult. The second one was a resource bank, but like the first group, we really felt that we need access to information about alternatives to casino capitalism and just demystifying the role that the banks play. And then the third one was quite a simple, practical one, which is open to everybody in this room, which is to get a share in a bank like Royal Bank of Scotland and go to their AGM, because it's a rare opportunity to come face to face with the directors, with Stephen Hester, and to ask some really difficult questions, because it is actually very easy to make them squirm, and then obviously then to report that, in whatever ways we use. That's our 3.
For the next group, please. Any group, that one there? Yeah.
Alright, okay.
So 3 minutes of fame.
We had a bit of a problem with definition, as you could imagine, so I'm probably not going to do a service to our group, so guys pipe up if I'm wrong. But it's good to see that we're echoing each other. I think the first thing we said was about Connect's media reporting of the economic crisis with the climate change movement, so basically making it more explicit, because within mass media, climate change and the environment is becoming, common parlance now, so maybe making that connection explicit. Is that cool? And then we thought of a more practical example, our friend here who was bringing us down a bit, hacking as a way to actually, I guess, kind of attack the hegemony of economics and business reporting. So hacking as a way of leveraging mass media network to disseminate the picture of economics, picture of economics and status quo. Who's truth though, but anyway. So that's maybe a more practical example. Another one, a bit airy-fairy, is etymologically speaking, redefining the word economics. As we said, what it means really is keeping your house in order, so that could tie in from everything from learning it at school to actually, how economics is defined in the media, but obviously that's a very slow process, and I don't know how practical it is. And then the other one, which I think a few of you have mentioned already, is essentially having, is it a kind of a website? Or
like to build a website for example.
Yeah, so meta resources for reporters on the subject of sustainability, so search engines, report sources, so basically making those links explicit and essentially saying like economics, money does grow in trees and all that kind of thing.
Like a criminal record profile for corporations.
Yeah, which Corporate Watch does to an extent now already. And I think that is it. Is there anything else, gentlemen? Cool. Okay, that's
Excellent.
it.
Thank you very much. How about that group in the far corner now, please?
Right, thanks. Our theme was challenging the pro-boss perspective in media, and the sort of main idea that we had was a data bank resource of press releases that were very easily accessible for journalists. So that rather than having to wade through all sorts of different websites or different groups or whatever, if they wanted to find a radical alternative, there's something that makes it much easier for them to present a different perspective. And then a lot of what we were talking about was organising that as a network and giving it credibility, so that journalists would see it as a useful source that they could actually rely on. And for that, we were talking about the importance of human interest and individual stories from like a sort of community perspective, alongside giving facts and narrative interpretations. And came on to using a network that could access local media, which has a sort of very inbuilt anti-cuts tendency a lot of the time, because it's makes for good copy. So it's just making things easy for journalists to present an alternative perspective, really.
Right. How about this group in the middle at the back, then, please? Have you got enough blue tack up there?
No, well, yes. Our job was to create our own, create your own, that's what the title was. So we decided what actions are we going to do to tackle this and create our own things. So the first thing, we would create an alternative credit rating agency. And we would use it to develop an ethical principles for credit rating called a credibility rating. And as part of that, we would also campaign so that banks in rich countries' debts and poor countries' debts should be viewed in the same way with the same rules and principles. So that's the first thing, the credibility rating and this agency. And we would also, get in the press as much as possible and challenge what's going on. The second thing we would do is do an ethical audit of profit. So whenever there were profit reports and share prices went up, we would research and report things like tax fraud, environmental damage, social damage, such as obesity, which is linked to Tesco's and food shops. We would view the growth in the banking sector as a cancer and define it as a cancer and describe it in that way. The other part of ethical audit of property will be we'd report workforce's wages and conditions for that company. And we'd provide alternative headlines which were understandable from the ordinary person's point of view, so linking it with the effects on their daily lives, such as the number of people below poverty line, number of free school dinners, the still and we'd also link it to how growth is linked to the poor as well. So that's number 2. And then the third thing is about communications, education and information. And we enable that to be translated into ordinary language and involve young people, so it would be taught in school, economics would be taught in school at secondary level, like science and history, and how it affects their everyday lives, because that's when people are starting to learn about money. But also, that might not work, because citizenship didn't work in the end. And so we need an alternative way of getting that information over to young people and involving them in that as well. So about perhaps creating enabling them to create cooperatives and stuff. And we need a glossary of alternative explanations of economic terms, so what they really mean. And as part of that sort of information and education, have an alternative publication and rewrite some of the main stories, expose financial crimes, and support the mainstream media to challenge the methods and system of money creation, and other things here for all parts of the same thing. Will use satire to show how all our banks and countries are bankrupt already, and use satire to take that to the whole thing to its logical conclusion. Yeah.
Brilliant.
We're doing quite well for time, so if anybody feels something.
So yeah, I mean, our topic was challenging business reporting and focusing on kind of the real cost of profits. I mean, I think what we were kind of looking at, which I think a lot of people look at, is just not so much challenging directly, but looking at alternatives. So we're thinking about perhaps some sort of schools program. So rather than about worrying and kind of challenging the media, you again kind of focus on people so that they can better read and better interrogate the reports that are out there. We also sort of had some kind of online resource, again, that's the idea of kind of making things easier for journalists. So you can provide critical summaries of business reports, critical summaries of kind of business reports, so that then journalists can kind of link to them. They've got a ready resource there so they can track them through. You can also include, for example, summaries of other kind of helpful papers. So, for example, actually IMF internal reports are very interesting and very critical of what's going on, but they don't get any kind of publicity and they're very hard to go through. So if you can provide a 100, 150 word summary, that's a very respectable resource that you could actually, use quite intelligently in your own favour. Again, just trying to find ways to focus on kind of human aspects and trying to kind of promote media in local communities and focus very much on kind of local businesses rather than perhaps worrying too much about national businesses like BP, which are ultimately kind of very distant and very kind of removed. And so try to change things on the ground locally, then that hopefully kind of changes the way people interrogate things on a national level. Another way is perhaps we're looking at simply better ways of presenting the information. Newspaper articles are quite dull to read, they take a long time to go through and obviously not very clear. If you can provide alternative, perhaps visual means of presenting information, so you can very clearly compare, say, GDP growth with, say, number of desk force in the business, for example, that's a much clearer and much easier way of getting to grips with the information. And another kind of specific idea was trying to kind of get out into kind of amongst local workers, basically, and provide information for them, for example, on how they can start criticising local businesses and get to them. So, for example, workshops on how to use the Freedom of Information Act, for example. And then the final one, which we kind of started working on in detail, but as you can see, we kind of never really got too far on, because I think we found the basic problem was the ideas are fine, but how do you actually get them out there is a real big issue, and there's a real big issue about preaching to the converted. How you actually get other people who aren't generally interested to kind of do that. And one thing we kind of talked about was a kind of site for focusing kind of alternative businesses that are very much embedded in local communities. So, for example, time banks and local pounds, for example, like the Brixton Pounds, or even kind of cooperatives, and providing kind of very open and critical in a kind of positive sense of how these kind of can be developed, problems they've had, and how other communities who are looking to develop these cooperatives can take those ideas further.
Thank you very much. Can we have the last group, please? Thank you.
Okay, well basically the idea is to create a website called adoptaneconomicsreporter.com or something similar. And on this website you'd have a list of like the top 20 economic reporters in the country. And each like economics report will have their own profile. So basically on that they'll have information on where they've perhaps been deceptive or biased, and that'll all be logged on each page. Yeah, and also transcripts from communication from the people who have adopted these reporters. On each reporter's profile there'll be a donation page, and all the money that's donated for each person will basically be used to buy adverts on search engines. So whenever anybody searches for this journalist, their profile will come up. So it's basically a way of pressurising journalists. We like it. So yeah, the website would also have links to other alternative media, as well as other like think tanks and other experts which perhaps hold a less biased view towards reporting. Yeah, and also there'd be a one-off publication which is sent across the journalists, which would basically let them know some certain statistics about like the way media reports economics, so percentages of how often certain businesses are mentioned in like a negative or positive light, and this would basically be a way of communicating to the journalists what the idea is here as well. So anything of that?
I just had one brief additional idea that was involved in that group, which was just to engage with the education of journalists, like the national journalist training journalists.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, is they often have a business journalist course on that. So if it also talks about the problems of business journalism.
Excellent. Thank you very much, that group. What a wealth of ideas. And Ruth has got 5 minutes to do this magnificent job, I know she's going to do, of synthesising all of those ideas. So, over to Ruth.
So we've got a lot of detail, but also kind of clearly, as is quite clear, kind of some very, very complementary approaches and a huge amount of overlap. I think probably one of my favourites was the establishment of a credibility rating agency that would look at sort of that would produce ethical audits of the profits of a range of companies. That would try and redefine the activities as banks as cancerous, and that would provide alternative indicators to go alongside economic growth, that would sort of, for example, provide regular updates on how many people are no longer living in poverty, or how many people are no longer having free school meals. So looking at those alongside what we conventionally count as progress. There seemed to be a stream around providing education in real economics. So looking in investigations in schools on what economic terms really mean. So perhaps a new economic dictionary coming out of that, which sort of does the you say growth, we say sort of social and we say social and ecological damage. So some kind of real economic dictionary. The use of more sort of freedom of information requests, I think, came up under that as well. We then had a very clear proposal on the
adopting an economics reporter, and I think within that, sort of very much looking at from the foundational level up. So perhaps encouraging journalism training schools to teach a wider range of economics, and also to go through some of the problems in terms of how things are reported matters, as well as the sort of, I very much like the sort of providing journalists with a mirror on what it is they say, so kind of reflecting back with some statistics about how they've reported and what that looks like. We then had sort of, to me there are kind of two complementary websites and networks, where we're on, one on banking, and where we're looking at a web resource that presents a range of the alternatives to the dominant banking system, that encourages people to regularly complain about the way that banking is reported in the media, so to make ourselves a nuisance by constantly writing to newspapers, ringing up the BBC, and a very practical question of one way that we can break through into the mainstream media is by going along to bank AGMs and asking questions directly there, so a lot more shareholder activism. There was then a sort of a proposal, really I think for many things, a proposal about a sort of an alternative web resource on economics as a whole that looks at the human and ecological impact, that provides a network of alternative voices, that provides a service where we summarise reports that are useful but hundreds of pages long. So making the alternative evidence more accessible. There was a point about visualisation, which might come under as part of that website. So providing it sort of instantly interpretable graphic representations of the impact of the way we currently organise the economy. And I thought that website, also then sort of potentially that website and network, which desperately needs a name, because the naming of things is very important. So that's one challenge, is what would it be called? Sort of potentially the kind of the real world economic outlook or something, but it needs a catchy name. So it's a fantastic idea, but it would be fantastic if someone could come up with a name for that. There was also then a kind of complementary, perhaps overlapping proposal about joining up all of the resources that are already out there. So there is a wealth of information out there, but it's kind of disparate and difficult to find. So some kind of meta engine that would provide access to the huge range of resources on sustainability that there are, that is a sort of a data bank. I think this is slightly separate, but I also like the idea of kind of stories from the front line of the economy. So sort of the human element stories from communities affected by tar sands, through to small businesses who can't get a bank loan, through to people who are excluded from the real economy. So that idea of providing a sort of eyewitness report from the front line of the economy I liked very much. And there was something separate that came out, which was about sort of hacktivism, and so this idea of hacking, so that you can go back in and rewrite stories as they really are, change what has been said using satire, and something also about redefining the word economics, so taking it back and transforming its meaning. And I think that all kind of, I very much like that idea of kind of rewriting stories as they really are, rather than as they've been reported. So I think that's kind of a nice way of challenging the system. And I think that is about it. But what we'd also like to do is just see.
Will we have an email list to make this happen?
Yeah.
Well, I think so. What it would be if people would like to leave their emails, it would be brilliant to set up a group. Because what we are hoping is that some of this might turn from ideas into action, and we'll have a talk with the organisers about whether some of these ideas can be shared more broadly among people who've come along, to see whether there are sort of groups that might meet together and actually make some of this happen.
One thing we can sort of all do tomorrow is just write in, whatever way the BBC does it, challenge things, or write to newspapers. I don't know whether you've got that on your list, but I think we should
Yes, we had.
all challenge.
Yeah. So a commitment to regularly challenging what is reported. Brilliant. Any
Will the, for instance, that can be transferred to the conference website?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, what we might do is see whether we can photograph these and put them on the conference website, which would then be a resource that people can tap into. But we will also look into, and perhaps if people can just leave their email addresses as they go.
There's a piece of paper circulating.
There's a piece of paper going round, and
This will be on the website as well.
So this will be on the website. The ideas, if we capture the images, will be on the website. And I'm thinking about whether if I will send an email. If I send an email around just listing the headline ideas, and we'll see where we go from there.
Yes. If and when you do send this email around, I think that would be very valuable, and to avoid any reinvention of the wheel.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the ideas that have come up here are really brilliant ideas which are not unique to this circle. And there are people already working on it who would love assistance and love new energy to come in.
So maybe if I send the email to you, you could maybe help connect.
Yeah, more than happy.
Okay, can we give Ruth and ourselves a great big
And
hand?
everybody.